Pirate kings, pirate queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea, what's up? How's it going? What's going on? I hope everyone is having a nice start to OP09 in whatever setting they've had a chance to play in. I personally just sailed in from my trip home, managed to play my first locals in quite some time. I will not be going into how that went, come to your own conclusions as far as how that went. And with work slowing down for the holidays, I am back on the content grind. I'm hard at work on the big Eastern format OP09 by the data video, making my graphics and rounding out my research on the decks I plan to cover. But if you're new to the channel, here's a little bit about my process for these videos. Whenever we have a new format coming out, I go to whatever source I have, in this case, One Piece Top Decks, Hirata on Twitter, and get as much info as I can, as many tournament topping lists as I can find, plug them all into a giant spreadsheet, and with that information, I am able to compute leader rankings, data-generated deck lists, a standard winning deck list for the leader, as well as other relevant stats to a deck, such as its cost curve, the number of 2K counters, the number of non-counter cards, blockers, events, triggers, relevant search targets, what have you, in order to give us the best snapshot of what we are picking up from as this new format, OP09 in our case, comes to our side of the world. If you enjoy this sort of thing, please stick around, leave a like. If you want more, if you want to know when that big OP09 by the data comes out, feel free to subscribe. And if you have any of your own thoughts on the deck that I am talking about today, if you have your own tech choices that you've included, if you have your own experience with the games you've played with this deck, I would love to hear them down below. Either way, this is Sakura Kingdom. Lovely to have you here. Let's get started. And one thing I forgot to mention, we're doing a giveaway. For the holidays, OPBounty has delivered. They have given me 100 Yonko tier subscriptions to give out to my viewers. I'm so glad that I can share the gift of data with everybody. I am going to spread this out a little bit throughout the rest of the OP09 content. For this one, I'm going to say, if you want to enter, tell me who your favorite member of the Blackbeard Pirates is in the comments. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this open throughout the rest of the OP09 data, content, binge, what have you. And then once I've got that big video out, what I'll do is I'll do a stream where I will compile all of the people who have commented to enter, and I'll do a random drawing for those 100 subscriptions. I'm also realizing I've never done a giveaway before, so I assume I'll need some way to contact you if you do win. So in that comment where you let me know your favorite member of the Blackbeard Pirates, leave either your email or your Discord username, and then even if you can't make it to the stream where I announce the winners, I can still let you know and give you your gift. If you do end up winning, all I ask is that you are publicly subscribed to the channel to validate it. And as I think more about this, I think I want to open it up a little bit more. So that entry question that I just mentioned will also be in the description, as will the instructions. But that just gets you one entry into the giveaway. If you want to increase your chances of getting this OPBounty subscription, I'm going to pepper in a couple other entry questions throughout the video. So if you want extra entries into this raffle, an extra shot at getting that subscription, watch through the whole thing, take a listen, find those other questions, or just, take a look at what other people mentioned in the comments there. I'm not going to make you work too hard if you're running low on time. But getting into our next leader from OP09, the filthiest degenerate to grace the seas, the man who will tell you that dreams never die and then pull yours straight into a black hole, Marshall D. Teach. Teach is a 5-life leader who can, for the price of 1 discard, lock your opponent out of any on-play effects for their next turn. This can shut down decks that rely solely or mostly on on-play effects, or, as I'll talk about soon, late-game leader effects, particularly hurting Enel and BY Luffy in this regard. Teach also gives the stipulation that his player can't use any of their own on-play effects either, but he has a very robust activate main package to make up for this, and I personally, I really appreciate the way that he breaks the mold compared to other black decks, since he can't use cards like Moria or Sabo. There is no question that this is an extremely powerful effect, but spamming it and losing a card from your hand every single turn has the potential to put you in a very fragile spot if you aren't careful, so the question of when and how often to use it can rely on a strong understanding of your opponent's deck as well as the format at large. Teach was definitely a top contender by the end of OP09 out east, but he also lagged behind for quite some time in those first couple months, potentially for this reason. And I do know that people who were following the Eastern metagame around CS season in November may be surprised to see Teach all the way down at number 6, potentially even surprised to see him in Tier 2. Like I just said, that delay may have a part in that since I'm looking at the whole format when I compute these rankings. I also think that CS versus flagship wins are going to be an extension of that and another potential reason. But I'm not sure I'd go as far to say that he is the boogeyman solely being kept in check by Dofi. I think this format is very dynamic. I think that in a given week, Teach could be anywhere from number 2 to number 6. It's just going to depend on all the other factors surrounding him and who it is playing the deck at that time. But back to playing the deck, this is going to vary from matchup to matchup and potentially from build to build, but you don't necessarily need to use this effect from turn 1, and you can conserve your hand until that key turn when your opponent's most impactful characters are going to start coming out. But in order to use that leader effect as often as we need to, we have to reduce the number of attacks our opponent gets to make. To this end, Teach plays a control strategy to immediately remove opposing characters while developing his board to get to one of the most devastating endgames possible. And speaking of devastating endgames, do you think that Teach is going to be the final villain in One Piece? Will he be Luffy's final adversary? Let me know in the comments for another entry into the giveaway. Anyway, there is a very good chance that when you play this deck, you're going to finish the game with 0 cards in your hand and life, just aside from your top deck. But you do have to consume these resources in order to win using Teach. And I don't know, for me, there's a certain adrenaline to knowing you used exactly what you needed with the most razor-thin margin of error to fulfill your grand master plan, which to me feels like the most Marshall D. Teach thing possible. Throughout the game, we are always working toward a board state where, even if we're down to 1 or 2 life with just a few cards left in our hand, we can slam down a couple copies of our 10-cost Teach to lock our opponent out of finishing us off. He is a 12k blocker that, on the turn he has played, can nullify the effects of your opponent's leader and one of their characters, and stop that character from attacking next turn. And this is where all of our board control really shines. If we can keep our opponent at bay to the degree that they only have 1 character when we reach 10 Don, we can freeze that character, block their leader's attack with the 10-cost Teach, and then when they play another character the next turn, we just swing out, play another Teach to then freeze the new character and block the one that can attack, or we keep our first Teach active to block the leader as well, depending on, hand and all those other factors, and then hopefully win the next turn. Of course, this is not foolproof. If our opponent plays multiple characters after our first Teach and or obliterates our life to the point that we have to block with all of our 10 Teaches instead of using them for pressure, we are going to have to pivot. We are going to have to use a couple of other cards that can shine in these situations. But the deck is more than just its big boss. And for that matter, our big boss may in fact be more than one big boss. Do you buy into the theory that Teach is actually 3 people based on his pirate flag, based on the different way that his teeth have been drawn and the different ways he has reacted to certain situations? I've always been a fan of that theory. I think there's something really cool there, fits in with a lot of different aspects of his character. Curious to hear your opinions. This is bonus question number 2. But rewinding a bit, we have to start this game off somewhere. We need to get the crew together. We have access to 12 cards that search Blackbeard pirates, and the data is telling me to run every single one of them. Lafitte is a Bonnie/Momo style searcher that rests himself and 1 Don to grab a Blackbeard pirate from the top 5, and he can pull our opponent's attacks away from our life. Now, that won't always be what we want, since we do need those first couple cards out of life in order to fuel the leader ability, but using them at the right time, sometimes even when we're between 6 and 9 Don alongside the removal that we play, that can give us the breathing room we need to have that more secure endgame. But we also have My Era Begins as an event searcher that looks at the top 3 and sends the rest to the trash. And even though we don't play Moria, we're not resurrecting cards, we do want to get our trash nice and full for Burgess, who I'll talk more about later. Our stage, Full of Lead, does the same thing every turn once it hits the field at the cost of a card from our hand, but filtering a 2k and getting closer to our endgame pieces is incredibly worthwhile. Eastern players took some warming up to this card in order to get it at the full 4 we see here, but I'm a big fan personally. And when you're in a situation when you have a choice between these 3 search cards, the decision is going to come down to how urgently we need a particular card, whether we want to filter our hand, and where we want our opponent's attacks to go. From there, we get to start controlling the board, and we want to play Doc Q on turn 2 to the point that he might be more of a priority for the mulligan than our searchers are. By resting him, we can KO a 1-cost character, which will be buffing the turn after with Van Augur or Laboon. Even though he can get those 1-cost weenie searchers, those aren't necessarily his targets. We really want to clear the first 4 or 5 cost our opponent plays the second it comes down, so we might have to conserve him for that purpose. All 3 of these cards, the Doc Q, the Van Augur, the Laboon, they can be hard for our opponent to let live, but Doc Q and Van Augur both draw a card when they're KO'd, so they can give our opponent a tough choice. Plus, Van Augur is a 6k, so he could require some investment to hit into. Dofi's going to be an uphill battle, just saying that right off the bat, but it certainly helps a bit, and we will take any upside we can in that matchup. And like I mentioned earlier, we do want to let those small hits on life through at the start, maybe even until we get down to 3 or even 2 life. Laboon and Van Augur will be prime attack targets in the mid-game, so that's where we want to put our counter for the hits where we only need to give up 1 card, sometimes even 2, depending on the specifics. We'll keep on controlling throughout the mid-game, but we can't always count on Doc Q to stay alive, or to be enough against those decks that play more than 1 character at a time, so our KO events are going to smooth things out for us. Finger Gun KOs a 5-cost, the same as a Doc Q boosted by Laboon, and it fuels our trash, making it very worth its unsearchability. Plus, seeing it off trigger can be brutal. And those 4 copies are then supplemented by Black Hole, which still hits the very relevant 4 costs will be up to our neck in against Dofi, and it can negate that 4 costs effect. This is very helpful against Burgess in the mirror, Lucky Roo and Shanks, even Jack if we add Van Augur's reduction on, since that Jack won't be base 11 anymore. It is a huge help in some very, very prevalent matchups. Just keep in mind that it doesn't get around effects like Sabo that place a condition on characters. If Black even gets to use a Sabo against you, But it's definitely the kind of card that you want to save for the exact moment when you need it, after getting your mileage out of the control pieces that we've already went over before. Black Hole has, at times, battled for space with other cost reducers like Ice Age and Tempest Kick, but I'm a big fan of the card. It seems indispensable the way the format is shaping up so far, and I also personally want to see how far the deck can go without those other reduction events before I add them in. The other cost reducer we do play is Stronger. You can think of him as a Great Eruption that says filter 1 instead of draw 1, and can be used as a 2k, but we also definitely want to hold on to him as that 2k for as long as we possibly can. And while I'm on the subject of searchable 2ks, we also have Shiryu. He could contribute to our trash for Burgess or Tempest Kick if you choose to run it, but we're probably putting him down on the field even less often than Stronger. But once we get to the late game, we should have a copy or 2 of Jesus Burgess available to us, and if we've been able to get that trash filled right, he is the pressure we'll need to push through at the end. He gets an extra 1,000 power for every 4 cards we have in the trash, and he can't be KO'd by effects, which could not be more irritating from the other side of the table. He only costs 4, so we can play him as early as turn 2 going second, but we could also lose out on valuable removal or end up having him taken out by an attack instead. From what I've seen, from what I've heard, the best time to play Burgess seems to be when your opponent has to focus on the characters we already have rested instead of developing their own board, or as a generally safe bet on 8 or 9 alongside some removal. But that said, playing him on 4 might be safe as long as we have plenty of removal for follow-up and don't have to worry about losing our tempo. Personally, I like the idea of him being an 8k or a 9k the minute he shows up, but if we have room to play Vasco Shot alongside him to block a big leader swing on him, that's another opportunity. But this guy can just get so beefy in the late game, and there can be some games where we just go all in on buffing him and forgoing the 10-cost teach plan entirely. And if our opponent does try to swing into him, the counters we use when defending him will contribute to his power buff. For example, if our opponent swings into him with an 8k while we have 6 cards in the trash, he will be a 6k when the attack goes through. We can put 2 more 1ks in the trash. The 2 1ks on their own will get him to 8k, but then we now have 8 cards in the trash, then he becomes a 9k. Just as an example. But the resource management in this deck is already a huge factor in the skill it takes to win with Teach, but I think that timing, using, and in the mirror, dealing with Burgess appropriately can be another real test. Ooh, and quick note for the mirror I found, the 10-cost Teach can shut off that KO resistance, so that's going to be a whole other minigame in the tempo battle leading up to those final turns on both sides. Have fun. And coming back to Vasco Shot real quick, he is one of the cards that wasn't played universally, but he is great to save your important characters. Your Burgess, your Doc Q, your Laboon, even your Van Augur, on those turns when your opponent tries to clear them, or if you end up missing out on a 10 teach and you're not able to get that stun going. He's also good on turns 3 or 4 alongside the Doc Q, the Lafitte, the Burgess you play, and he can ease up on pressure from that new 10 Shanks, since that is going to make your teach into an 11k. That softens him up just enough where he's not as foolproof. And the last card we have in this list here is the single copy of Jack. It is definitely the most flexible card in the list. I think there was only one list I found that played just a single copy, and the second copy would be our 51st card, but he does have his uses here, even at 1. He can deal with a big body in combination with Laboon or Van Augur, and he can filter your hand or put pressure on just that little bit more. And Dofi might be pressed if he's not running Red Rock, but you also might not be able to get the best KO possible if you don't have the Don, the reduction, or the utility on board for it, so there's also that argument to go without. I'm still on the fence myself. There are options for this 50th slot. I might try a second copy. That will probably be a big factor in coming to that decision when I see him more consistently. And I'd say that I'm also very much on the fence about whether or not the 10th Titanic captain, Kuzan, is actually loyal to Blackbeard. If he is undercover as a Marine, as a revolutionary, I go back and forth on each one because Oda's just played it so ambiguously. It's beautiful, but I'd like some other input. This is bonus question number 3. Do you think Kuzan is the real deal, a real Blackbeard pirate, or is he undercover? Let me know. So those are these 50 cards, but before I go into the card count stats, I do want to try something a little different with this video. With any format, things are going to change week to week, month to month. I think OP09 in the East was really dynamic myself, so what I ended up doing was I ended up rerunning the algorithm just for each individual month of the set. So we're going to break this teach data down into 3 lists, one for September, one for October, one for November. We'll see that in the first month, people were focusing very much on 1 cost reduction events, Tempest Kick, Ice Age, not as much Hachinosu, only 1 in this list right here, and 1 Vasco shot as well. They weren't going as far into that direction, and it's only a slight difference, but, the difference between 9 cards we can't see off of Hachinosu, or Full Lead, and 14 cards we can't see off Full Lead is a fair difference, and those 1 cost reducer effects can affect whether or not Full Lead is going to be as consistently viable for us. After that first month, though, as the format started to solidify more, those 1 cost events did end up going away. Augur went up to a full 4. People were running Vasco shot at a 2 of more often, and 3 Jack was very, very common. People were very, very split down the middle as far as how many Black Hole to run. Did still see play. And as we headed into championship season, we came to see a list very similar to what I presented at the start of this video. This is when Teach really hit his stride. And there was, in mid-November, a fair amount of discourse about, is Teach the best deck in the format? Is it no longer Dofi's era? And for a couple of those weeks with those top 16s, there was a chance. But things also got very much disrupted in the last 2 CSs, to the point that I think this is still very much a revolving door format. It could also just be Dofi pushing him out of the hotel lobby for a couple weeks, but the concept remains. The only difference you'll see between this CS/November list and the one I presented before is that instead of that 1 copy of Jack, we do have 1 copy of Bartolomeo. I like this a lot. It's still only 9 cards that are not searchable off of Hachinosu. I will say the one quirk of this is that these Bartolomeo were always run with a couple Moncherry from OPO5, which I also think is pretty neat. It can come into conflict with our Burgess, but it could also get the Burgess that we need. I can't really say more either way without having tested it myself. But everything else was just so common that, in this case, the 2 copies of Moncherry would have been the 51st and the 52nd. Bartolomeo just squeezed in that little bit more. To me, it seems that if you are very good with this deck, if you know exactly when Bartolomeo is going to be used in the best way at a certain time, he could go very far for you. Could also be a 3rd copy of Vasco shot. There were a fair amount of people who bumped him up all the way to 3 at this point as well. But there's a brief-ish timeline of how these teach lists evolved over time. Let me know what you think of this. I do plan to do this for at least Shanks, potentially the other leaders as we go up through the, the Tier 2, Tier 1 lists for the big video. Always curious as to how y'all feel about any new additions to these kinds of videos. But coming into the card counts here, all of this should be very familiar to us by now. We will see that Tempest Kick is the only card that was not in the main list I spoke about that was over 50%. I do think that's just because of the sheer number of low achievement lists that we had at the start of the format that are pushing it up there. But potentially worthwhile, depending on your metagame. I know that not every locals is going to be the same as a CS, as I had a very nice reminder of this past Monday. Shout out Millennium Games. No salt. Love you guys. And then we'll see those cards that were in less than 50% of these lists. Talked about most of this top row already. The 9-cost Kaido, there is something cool there. If you know you are going to be walking into a lot of mirrors, I can definitely see him making his way in. The Kaido plus Tempest Kick particularly, because the 9-cost Kaido and a Tempest Kick, that's just going to KO their 10-cost Teach if you do not see yours. And he's just also a big removal piece that, like Jack, can be used in the mirror. He can also get those KO-resistant characters like the Burgess, even cards that are protected by Sabo since he just places into the trash. Spoke briefly about Moncherie and Bartolomeo already. Everything else is under 10%. The one-legged soldier is cool. He's another cost reduction option. He is another 2K, also not searchable, and he's just in this weird middle ground where he costs more than the Ice Age or the Storm Kick. He is a 2K, but I think that if he were a Blackbeard pirate, it would be a totally different story, obviously, but the fact that he is not just bumps him down that little bit free compared to the events. Sasuke's basically the same thing, although you do rest him instead of sending him to the trash, so he could divert some attacks potentially. Haven't tried it myself. Nightmare Luffy is always spicy. I'm always going to have some respect for that card. Katarina and Devon, really neat design. I love what they went for with this. Just too situational to work when the deck is as cramped as it is. But it is just so cool seeing her have all these different abilities. Just like Teach. 2 Devil Fruits already. Some people think he's going to have a third one. Do you? Is he going to get a third fruit? He loves number 3. If so, what do you think it's going to be? This is bonus question number 4. I may have missed an opportunity to make it number 3, but the segues just segued where they segued. Let me know. Vivi is a blocker that can come out of trigger. I know that one list that played her was one of the CS toppers, so I'm not fully discounting her. Hina's a neat 2-for-1 blocker, and then Tashigi basically fulfills that same sort of purpose that Sasaki, that the one-legged soldier would. And might be a little more durable if they try and attack into her and you think you're going to need her more often, but the package we have is just so good already. It might be win more, in my opinion. But if you disagree, hey, let me know. If you've managed to get a game off with Tashigi, with one-legged soldier, with any of these, let me know. And then we have our cuts and additions. Jack is just right on the precipice, either way. And then we can shave down those utility cards, maybe some Hachinoshu, maybe a Black Hole. Vasco Shot, if you don't think you need him, then go for it. The Shiryu can go down, potentially. And then those additions are really the ones we talked about, either adding in the second Jack, more Vasco, the Bartolomeo Moncherie combo, the 1-cost reducers, even a third Jack if you want to go more toward those October kind of builds. But that is Marshall D. Teach. Blackbeard. Not everyone is going to be a fan of decks like this. I don't know if I am ashamed to say that I am a fan. I think that having something unorthodox, something that you really have to play around, something that is going to require very, very, very careful management to play effectively, only when it requires that careful management, then I think it's a really cool addition to a format. It keeps things dynamic. I also love me some board control. I love board control that goes against the grain. No Moria, no Sabo, like I said earlier. I just don't love the fact that Laboon is, $40 now? Okay, I just double-checked. He's only $30. Thank God. But yeah, that's going to be the barrier to entry here. I will not be playing him unless I come into a fair amount of store credit, unless I get lucky if I find a pack of EBO1 in the wild. But in the meantime, I can vibe with him on Sim. I'll need the practice, anyway, if I do want to start playing him. I certainly hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know if you are excited for Teach, if you think he is a disgrace this entire game, if you have any fun ideas you're chefing with him. If you did enjoy the video, let me know by leaving a like, and I am going to keep going with the OPO9 by the data Eastern Edition content as we go along. I'm going to be doing a Shanks video in the next couple days. I am finishing my research on that as soon as I finish this up. I am going to be doing an analysis of OPBounty games from the first week now that we have a larger sample size, now that we have some billion tier games to look at. Anyway, that is Teach. Thank you so much. Once again, hope you've enjoyed. This is Sakura Kingdom. I've got a black hole in my stomach, and I'm going to eat as much as I possibly can because I am too hungry to edit this on an empty stomach. I will see you real soon. Bye.